Welcome to our first program of 2022. My name is Ricardo Alfaro, Chair of Agenda Alexandria. Unfortunately, the high community transmission of COVID-19 has made it impossible for us to entertain an in-person audience. Tonight, we face the reality that COVID-19 is still very much a pandemic that continues to directly impact our society. The good thing is that Agenda Alexandria has been able to adapt. Thanks to you, we're still able to offer these virtual programs about issues that continue to affect our community. Tonight's program is extremely timely. Thanks to the efforts of board members Mary Harris and Eileen Ahern, Treasurer Val Hawkins, Vice Chair Rod Kukrow, and our Executive Director Pat Miller, we will be able to offer an extraordinary set of panelists to whom we send our appreciation for their willingness and availability to participate. The Torpedo Factory Art Center is a city icon. We sincerely appreciate the collaboration with the Art League to be able to bring you tonight's virtual program from the Torpedo Factory Art Center. This program is possible thanks to our generous sponsors and members. Thank you to Simpson Development, McInerney and Associates, and the Zebra Press. Additional thanks to our sustaining members. Thank you to members like you. If you're not yet a member, please consider joining today at give.agendaalexandria.org.
Thank you, Ricardo. Thank you very much. Hello, my name is Rod Kukrow, and I'm the Vice Chairman of Agenda Alexandria. And I'd like to invite our audience to help share tonight a really interesting panel on the future of the Torpedo Factory Art Center here in Old Town Alexandria. We are broadcasting tonight from the second floor, Studio 221 of the Torpedo Factory, which was in fact built in 1918 as a torpedo factory to make munitions both in World War I and World War II. After its use was finished by the Navy, an enterprising young artist in Alexandria named Marion Van Landingham had the idea around the time of this, I think it's the country's bicentennial, to turn this into an art center. And we're lucky to have among our panelists tonight, Marion Van Landingham. I'd like to start out, Marion, by just welcoming you and asking you to sort of briefly explain to the audience how this all came to be.
Well, in 1974, you couldn't get to the Alexandria waterfront. Basically, you had three large gray buildings left from World War I and World War II. And between them, at the street ends, there was nothing but cyclone fence gates. So basically, the waterfront was a forgotten thing. Our lease was running out for the Art League up on Cameron Street across from City Hall. And I was looking for space. I was president of the organization. And one day, the chairman of the Bicentennial Commission, Jim Goldsmith, a local editor of the local newspaper, said, "Why not the Torpedo Factory? The city doesn't know what to do with it." And I came down and looked at it, and I was so impressed by the space. It was dirty. The paint was flaking. There were pigeons in it. And there was still federal GSA storage of old desks, bookcases, and junk. But I immediately saw that it would be wonderful open space for artists to work. The city council and Mayor Beatley was very supportive when I asked for basically a 3-year experiment to see if it would work. And so they agreed to it. And the artists went in and started painting and cleaning the place up so that we could do that. Now, I will say all the citizens in town weren't necessarily for it. Some of them wanted all those ugly buildings torn down and grass put across there, and access. But we did already have one weed-filled block above the Torpedo Factory that became Founders Park later. And we suggested that they proceed with that. But anyway, that's where we started. It was a very, an operation that was very carefully done, but mostly by the artist. I was put under general services for the city, and that was actually pretty good, because if we had needed a plumbing problem or a carpentry problem, we could go to general services. And they were not interested in the art. They let the artists do the art. So that was the way we started. Now it's, we'll be at our 50th birthday in another 2 years, which is really quite astounding. It has become a model for similar art centers across the country. They're sort of children and grandchildren of the Torpedo Factory, with each community doing it its own way. But it's one of the things we're proud of, and it has brought people from across the country and for other countries. It's a major attraction for the city of Alexandria. There's no question about that. And that's, we think, is important. It also brings artists from the entire metropolitan area to the area.
Well, thank you for the summary, Marion. And obviously, no matter what happens with the future of this building and its use, I think everybody in the city of Alexandria owes you a great deal of gratitude for having made this for 48 years, sort of a central focus of tourists, and not just to mention people in the city bringing relatives and friends to the factory. So today, as the building stands, and Diane, I want to introduce Diane Ruggiero, who's with the city. Diane is essentially with the Deputy Director of the Parks and Rec Department, but in effect, you are the landlord. You are the person who manages this building. Is that correct?
So, I am the Deputy Director for Recreation, Parks, and Cultural Activities. The city of Alexandria is the landlord.
Okay.
So me and my team of staff at the Art Center, we manage the day-to-day operations at the Art Center.
But when the artists have a question, they call you. So as I understand it, according to the city's website, which may or may not be accurate, there are 82 studios here that are shared by 141 working artists who are here because they've been juried in by their peers. And I thought one of the things the website made a point of saying is that this is the nation's oldest continually operating community of publicly accessible working artist studios under one roof in the United States. And that's, I think that says something. I know at the last council meeting where this was considered on December 14th, and we may talk about that, Councilwoman Del Pepper, who stepped down recently from her 30-some years on council, said, I think that this facility gets 500,000 visitors or more a year. Putting it not up there with Mount Vernon, obviously, but when people come to Alexandria, there's a good chance they're going to step foot in here and maybe then go spend money in Old Town on a meal. So, Diane, if you could just bring us up to speed on sort of what's happening now. The City Council, as I mentioned, had a meeting on December 14th to look at options for the future of this building, not to mention a larger arts district that would stretch along the Alexandria waterfront northward and into Old Town.
There's a lot there to unpack,
Yep.
so I'm going to do the best that I can. So just to kind of provide a little bit of context, we've been working with City Council, for a number of years now on a path forward for the Art Center. This past June, they asked staff to, come up with a series of options of different ways to move the Art Center forward. So as you said, on December 14th, City Council had that meeting, and at that meeting, the mayor kind of presented an additional memo and an additional option in an effort to move the Art Center forward based on what they're hoping to be a successful undertaking in Old Town North. With the initiative of the Arts and Culture District in Old Town North, I'll let Stephanie fill you in on how she's going to investigate the opportunity for the Torpedo Factory within that. But since Council's decision on December 14th, we are moving forward with the action plan. So they gave the direction for that. We're also moving forward with a plan for community engagement because all of the scenarios had a level of community engagement, as part of moving the Art Center forward. So we're undertaking that. So, and then we also just have the amazing day-to-day experience at the Art Center. So, the Art Center right now, even though we're still kind of dealing with the COVID pandemic, our artist studios are full, which is amazing. We have artists every day who are asking about, how can they get a studio at the Art Center and things like that. So, that is still moving forward. We are looking forward to, some kind of, but I'll say like a post-COVID time where we could go back to being open 7 days a week and, having some evening hours. But, like a lot of other organizations, we've been doing a hybrid of different kinds of programs. Some are in person, some are virtual, just to kind of keep our community engaged. But you're right, the Art Center sees about 500,000 people a year. They come from all over. Some come from, Alexandria in the DC metro region. But as the artists can tell you, we get folks from all over the world that come and visit the Art Center. And, I think that that's one of, all of that is kind of really why City Council just really wants to see the Art Center, move forward, continue to grow as an attraction here in Alexandria. I think Scott Shaw shared with you during his discussion with you last week that, 4 million people come to visit Alexandria each year. So, we've got some additional people that can make the Art Center a stop on their trip.
So Diane, you mentioned that council on December 14th approved an action plan. What exactly is in that action plan, and what are you going to have to do in response to that?
So the action plan was actually presented to council earlier in 2021, and it was in response to a previous request of council of some things that we could do in the short term, while we look for opportunities for capital funding or other types of facility improvements. What are some of the things that we could undertake, kind of towards that effort? So some of it are smaller capital improvements. So things like replacing the banners on the outside of the Art Center, refitting a studio space in the Art Center to serve as an event or a classroom or workshop space in the Art Center. So we're undertaking that. Looking at things like the operating rules and procedures, so just some really basic administrative stuff that we need to do. So the action plan covers, 3 specific areas, in which we can undertake in the short term to work to move the Art Center forward. Now, while these longer term, bigger conversations are happening.
Okay, thank you. Our next panelist is Stephanie Landrum, and for Agenda Alexandria members, she is no stranger. You've appeared on numerous panels over the last several years. Stephanie, thank you for doing that. Stephanie is the Executive Director of the Alexandria Economic Development Partnership, and in her role in that partner as directing that effort, she will be integral in trying to craft what the city is contemplating, which I understand involves the creation of an authority that would fund, help fund and support spaces for the arts. And it would marry whatever happens to the Torpedo Factory in the next several years with this expansion of art-related spaces in the North Old Town neighborhood, where developers, I understand, in exchange for added density and height, essentially, have pledged for 30 years to provide space for artists of various kinds: theater, painting, sculpture, dance, whatever comes along. So Stephanie, so you got Diane and the city staff working on this action plan. The city council is going to have an outreach effort, and a stakeholder group I think will be put together. Where will AEDP fit into that matrix of activities that will help decide the future of this building?
Well, thanks for having me back, Rod. I think I was thinking about tonight's session and thinking about how many times I have been on Agenda Alexandria over the last few years. And I think it speaks to how economic development is growing in the city. When AEDP gets involved in projects, it's typically because the project is a catalyst or an anchor. And then you layer on top of that there's potentially some tricky real estate issues that need to be figured out. That seems to be a lot of where AEDP's expertise and flexibility can be beneficial to help achieve city goals. And so while I've also been on here before talking about small business issues, and there's a ton of other things that AEDP has been involved with, specifically what council is asking us to bring to the table as it pertains to the Torpedo Factory is seeing if there is some tool and some set of solutions that AEDP can help bring to the table to solve, frankly, what is a real estate issue. As Diane said, there's a vibrancy plan for the Torpedo Factory. There have been tons and tons of discussions about kind of who, what, where inside the building, and there will continue to be iterations of that. But AEDP's role in this project is really about the real estate. The major issue I think we're trying to solve is everyone agrees improvements need to be made to the building. And those numbers
can I stop there for a second for our audience's sake?
Sure.
So the city, there are several memos handed out to City Council, and there was a good PowerPoint presentation. And correct me if I'm wrong, Stephanie, but I think there's an immediate need for about 18 to 19 million in sort of basic maintenance that had frankly been put off by preceding councils for decades. I mean, this involves bathroom modernization, ADA compliance, HVAC, electrical systems, not to mention we're in a studio right now, as nice as the space is, all the paint's peeling. And on top of that, there's another 10 or 15 $million, I think the city staff presentation showed, for other long-term maintenance. And I'm just guessing that would be part of what an arts authority would raise money to do. Is that right?
I think that's what we've been asked to explore. So you mentioned Old Town North. The challenge that we're trying to solve in Old Town North is we have real estate that has been built or will be built by the private sector. And as you explained, they're building it because in exchange they get to build additional, mostly residential density, right? And the way that the Old Town North Arts District is structured, the developers are building space for arts uses, but then the arts uses themselves need to come in and build it out. And so we've realized we're at this juncture where our intent was to provide predictable, affordable space to arts users so that they could remain in Old Town North as Old Town North continues to see new investment. The reality is they're still having trouble, even knowing that they can come in and have free rent for a while, for a pretty significant amount of time, they still can't get over the hurdle of kind of raising money. And so our thought and the concept that we're trying to prove in Old Town North is if this authority comes in or this other entity, whether it be AEDP, we have something called the Industrial Development Authority, and then the third option is to set up kind of an art-centric authority. If they could come in and control the real estate, we could actually borrow funds to help build out the space.
Okay.
And so there's lots of structures using tax-exempt bonds. As you just mentioned, there's an ability for a separate entity to fundraise. There might be grants available through other venues that an authority or group that was running a district might have more access to than just these individual arts users. And so that's the concept that we're proving. The council has dedicated some federal ARPA funds to help us get this whole effort started. And parallel to that, obviously, were these long-standing conversations about the Torpedo Factory. And so the mandate or the directive from council as it pertains to AEDP from December is you're already doing all this other work and creating this amazing arts district. We have this amazing arts catalyst literally right on the edge of the district. Why don't you look at what you could potentially bring to the table to help solve the real estate side of things? Because, and the last thing I'll say, and then I'll let you continue,
okay.
But whether it's 18 million or 45 million, it's too many millions, right?
Yeah.
We don't have that money sitting in a bank account. And it continues to have to compete every year with really pressing needs that the city has to pay for. And so really council was like, let's look at this and figure out if there's any way that this new structure could bring some dollars to the table.
Thanks for that great explanation, Stephanie, of what the various funding options could be. One more occurs to me. I was talking to somebody this week who's involved with the Historic Alexandria Foundation. And the building, of course, was built in 1918, and it's within the old and historic district, but it is not in and of itself on the National Register of Historic Places. If it were, I'm told, there would be all kinds of federal tax incentives that could be used to defray the costs of doing the kind of work that you say that this needs to be done on the building, and I'm looking at it now, it certainly needs to be done. My other question is, when that work is going to be done, it seems to me they'll have to empty the building out for a period of a year or two or more, and that leaves, then where do you put the people? I think right now, There's about 35,000 square feet of actual studio space. I mean, where is there 35,000 square feet of empty city-owned space where the city could say, this is where we're going to let you move now for a period of a couple of years to sort of reestablish yourselves before you move back toward the Torpedo Factory? What kind of thoughts being given to either historic preservation status for the building or where to move people when this much needed capital redevelopment work is done?
I think that is part of the magic potentially behind tying the Torpedo Factory to this Old Town North Arts District. We are creating new art spaces in this district that will probably triple the amount of total art space. I think what you said, 32,000 square feet of
I think it's
35,000
studios. Yeah.
I mean, we have the potential to have a significant amount of space in Old Town North as projects continue to come through the pipeline. And so thinking about temporary relocation, splitting of uses. I know there's been talks about, maybe an ultimate scenario in the Torpedo Factory is having the same set of uses, but maybe some of them are a little bit smaller, having a second location, thinking about galleries in multiple spaces. I think all of that is on the table. I also think that the direction from council included language about the intent is not to displace anyone. And so they are expecting us to come back with options and solutions if the path forward is complete renovation of a building and shutting it down for a period of time. The expectation is that we have a solution for where people can go.
Great, okay.
And I will say, if I can just add to that, Rod, that was part of the presentation that we made to council on December 14th. So in the PowerPoint presentation and in the numbers that were crunched, it was factored in that artists would need to be relocated to an off-site facility. I think we had baked it into the equation that it would take about 2 years to do 18 months to do the construction, right? But you got to have time to move everybody out and then move everybody back in. And in the math that we were using, we factored in that we would actually, because the city doesn't necessarily have city-owned space to do that, so we might have to rent some space. So, trying to figure out what the rent would be. So we did bake that into the numbers and the timeline and all of the other considerations involved with a renovation of the art center.
And of course, all these presentations you're talking about are on the city's website, so anybody who's watching this can go and do a search and find out exactly what you're talking about. I've waited too long. I'm sorry to introduce the artist on our panel tonight, Lisa Schumeyer. Lisa Schumeyer lives not far from me in Delray. Although we just met for the first time this evening, which is tells you that as much of a small town as Delray is, it's not that small. Lisa, welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So you've heard both Stephanie and Diane talk about the city's best efforts to get people out, to improve the space and get them back in. I know that you've been here for quite some time. How many years have you had a studio here?
I think 16 at
16?
This point. Yeah,
and
a while.
And the one thing that struck me is when I first started looking into this issue about 2 months ago, that there is a petition with about 8,000 signatures on it. I'm not sure people who signed it understand exactly what they were signing, but it's essentially in opposition to doing anything with the Torpedo Factory that will jeopardize the artists' well-being and ability to continue working here. And in Alexandria, that's a fairly sizable amount of public outcry. I mean, when the Seminary Road Diet was all the rage last year, I think they got 2,000 people on a petition, and that was seen as some big deal. So 8,000 seems like a lot, but regardless of the size of the petition, you work here all the time. You've got friends and colleagues here. I mean, are there aspects of what the city is contemplating that you can understand is necessary and probably can be a good thing in the end? If so, what are they? But then what would your concerns be beyond that?
Well, my main concern is that I don't want to lose what the focus of the Torpedo Factory is, which is working artists in open studios. I feel like that's really core to our mission and to what we do, and one of the reasons why we attract such a diverse group of visitors. And it's not looking at a fully formed building. It's enjoying the craziness of a construction site. It's like that kind of a thing. so much going on in the building that you can come in and look and you can see it started, and then a week later you can come back and look at that artwork and it's in the middle, and a couple months down the road it's finished. And I think that that is way more interesting to people than just a gallery. And that, I think, is one of the main problems with a lot of these propositions, that, you know, the proposals that have come forward, is they think they know what they're talking about, but they're going to put galleries on the first floor because that will be more financially sustainable, but it's just not as interesting to people. And I think part of what we do, I interact with so many kids every day, and that's one of the most important things about my job to me, is letting kids and families know that being an artist is really a career, that you can actually make a living at it. And Scott, the other night on your interview, said that no one in the building made a living. Well, I certainly make a living, and other artists on the first floor, another artist employs 3 people. So, I mean, yes, we're making livings here, and it is really important to us. So it's not just, you know, messing with our hobby. I really take, you know, I don't care for that. It's not our hobby. And we've made a commitment to the city in terms of educating the public that walks in. It's not just, yeah, we get reduced rent, but we get it for providing a service. And can we do it better? Absolutely, we can do it better. But it's important what we do.
Well, let me ask this question both to you and Marion, because I know I've asked this of the city. There's no metric that the public can look at, or the city government for that matter, and say, we've got 141 artists, and last year they sold, let's say, $10.8 million worth of art, and the sales tax was paid on that to the city. I mean, there's no reporting requirement from the artists,
Right.
And the city doesn't really know how performance is going here, whether or not people are simply in it for a hobby, or if they're working really hard full time and making some really large sales, but no one knows about it, so the success can't be measured.
We have business licenses.
Okay.
The city the state takes
Right.
taxes from the city takes taxes from us. The region takes taxes.
So you could, with some investigation, figure out what it was. We don't have we don't have to report it. I wouldn't mind reporting mine. I'd be happy to share it with anybody that wants to see it. The hours that I work every week, and the money that I make, and, you know, the amount of volunteering that I do. I would be happy to share that.
Yes, Mary.
Well, I think that that's important. I would also like to comment on another direction, and that is, when you're talking about renovating the building and how much it's going to cost, that to some degree there are things that maybe you think need to be done that don't necessarily need to be done. This antique building, and actually it's a very historic building, both by its age, is actually perfect for the kind of use that we put for it. And I would go on to add that you can't add additional floors in it because of the foundation. They put in the mezzanine in 1983 when taking the King Street corner away from the artist and making it commercial. That put the maximum weight on the foundation. So you can't go in and commercially put something on the roof or add in another floor.
So what you're talking about is the idea has been floated that there'd be a great place to have a nightclub on top of the Torpedo Factory.
Oh, let me tell you, there was some members of council that were really enthusiastic about that.
It would be great.
Be great, but the roof won't take it. So you really can't do that. And the other thing is, yes, we need to increase the restrooms on the floor because of all the people on the docks and in the neighborhood who will come in and use the Torpedo Factory restrooms. Well, you can repair the restrooms without closing down the building for 2 years and me making the artist go somewhere else for 2 years. The building may not be perfect for a lot of purposes, but for the uses of the arts, it happens to work rather well. This antique building has managed to serve its purpose. And while improvement certainly could be made to it, it doesn't need to be spiffed up to the point that it then becomes really valuable commercial space and therefore has to go to a different use. So I just want to make that as a point. I think the worst thing that could happen just about would be to disperse the artists for 2 years. A lot of them would never come back. It would not survive that, I don't believe.
So you think if some artists are told it's time to move out for renovation, they may decide to go look to, I don't know, go to Frederick, Maryland, or Arlington, or
It would.
DC, and just say, I'll find a home in some other artist colony.
That happened in 1983 when the renovation that we now took place.
So artists left and didn't come back.
Yeah.
And how long did it take to rebuild that sort of critical
Well,
mass?
in that case, we had one advantage, and that is that half the artists were compacted into the King Street corner while the renovation was done on what we're in. So half the artists stayed on site. Half went down to a former school building down on Fort Hunt Road. And some of them did not come back. But if you were make all the artists leave and go somewhere very different and don't have a continuum, I think you will kill the Art Center,
Okay.
which may be the purpose of some people that want it for real estate purposes.
Ah, okay. Diane or Stephanie, do you want to respond to what Marion said at all, or?
So one just kind of larger thing I think is important to mention is the Torpedo Factory is an asset and it is a catalyst. And I don't think that anyone disagrees with that. I think the conversations we're having as of late are how to assure that that continues moving forward as people's preferences change about how they shop and visit and what sort of experiences they're looking for, and making sure that the physical building that the city owns isn't prohibiting kind of that type of growth. And the thing that I just was thinking about as Marion was talking, it's not different than conversations we have about what uses we allow on King Street. We are committed to all of King Street, all 17 blocks of it being vibrant. Like, our goal is to have the first floor of all of King Street be vibrant. And sometimes we've gone through periods where the types of businesses that we've wanted to be there just haven't been growing and haven't wanted to go there. And so we get these pressures for real estate offices or medical uses to come in. And we, as a city, set a policy and we stick to it, and we get asked to change it or not. But the vision is for it to be active and vibrant. For this building, a lot of the renovations I think that are on the wish list are very much focused on making the building more open and sort of embracing all of King Street. And it's not to hurt the artists, it's to overall build on the strength of Old Town and the experience, because we can all debate how many people come to this building. The thing that we do know, the number one thing that people come to visit Alexandria for is our neighborhoods. So Old Town as a thing, as a destination, that's what people are coming for. Is the Torpedo Factory a huge and important piece of that? Yes, but it's not the only piece. And so I think that the discussions we're having about renovations to the building are as much about the bathrooms and the HVAC as they are about making the building more accessible and how it's oriented to kind of the larger community, which has changed. I mean, think about what's on the outside of the Torpedo Factory today versus just 5 years ago. We've invested so much money, and so we want to make sure that people aren't coming and hanging out in Waterfront Park or going to the restaurants and not even coming into the factory because they don't know what's in there. So it's obviously very complicated, but I think everyone's intent is pretty aligned.
Oh, that's a good answer. I appreciate that. We're starting to get questions in from the audience, and the first one we received is really, it's a money question. This is Moneyball. And I don't know what's better for it to ask of you, Diane, or you, Stephanie, or both. But it said, would the city need to underwrite the bonds issued by an arts authority? I think it's a good question because we have another authority in town, of course, Renew Alexandria, which treats our water and our sewage. And they, of course, have a revenue stream from the monthly bills they send to our households. But we have another authority, which is the Redevelopment Housing Authority, which was terribly mismanaged about 20 years ago, and the city had to bail them out because there was nobody else to bail them out, and the city taxpayers were on the hooks for the unpaid bond interest and other lost revenue of that authority. So I think this is a good question. If the city creates an arts authority and for some reason it doesn't quite meet its debt obligations, is the city taxpayer on the hook for that money?
The model that we are looking to build is one that is independent from the city, and so would not require the full credit of the city. But in order to do that, it needs to have its own balance sheet. And so that's why in Old Town North, we're looking at the acquisition of assets so that we can borrow against them.
Okay, this questioner, or viewer asks, if the city intends to take actions based upon the council guidance, December 14th, what feedback specifically will be sought from the community, and how will that work? Diane, is there anything more you can tell us about the process that would
So, I think we, in 2017, we did the community engagement study about the Torpedo Factory. And I think now that we've got some more specific questions to ask and answer. So, we'll kind of be looking to, with the work that Stephanie and her team are going to be doing, just kind of what are we thinking the residents of Alexandria are going to want from their art centers. So, just making sure we're going out and asking those questions again. It'll be a really involved process. We have a lot of stakeholders and a lot of folks that identify as stakeholders in the art center. So while we talk about the community, we also have other stakeholders, looking at businesses and potential partners and all of those kinds of groups. And so it'll be a fairly involved process, and but working to inform kind of that next step going forward.
So I understand the artists are stakeholders clearly, because they live and work here. And some actually sleep overnight here sometimes when they're working on a project. But as far as small businesses go, how are they stakeholders in the Torpedo Factory? I mean, if you own a jewelry store on Upper King Street, I mean, what's your interest in the Torpedo Factory, and why should you be part of the group providing feedback?
Well, they're paying taxes to the city, and this is a city facility.
But
so,
that's
every
like
person
50,000 people pay taxes to the city. How do you decide which ones are on a stakeholder group?
They all are.
Typically what the city does, right, is try to find people who represent different types of stakeholders,
Right.
and so I think that's why the small business community is absolutely interested. I mean, one of the conversations I know that Lisa and Marion have probably heard a lot about too is artists who are in the building doesn't mean that artists who are currently not in the building aren't stakeholders as well. There are lots of people, I mean, as I understand it, there are tons of people who would love to have studio space. There's a waiting list, right? Yeah. And so we could sit here for 3 more hours probably coming up with a list of people who could make a very credible claim to being stakeholders and how this building gets used.
Okay, well let's just talk about the artists. I mean, you brought up an interesting point that there's a wait list to get into the space here, because it's so valuable. Because if you have a studio here and you're with all these other artists, you get a lot of foot traffic on certain days of the week and certain times of the year. As I understand it, what's going to happen now under the city's direction is there will be a 3-year period of all these artists here sort of being given a second look by a jury. And there might be a decision made, I suppose, that they'd be able to return or not return. At the same time, applications will be open. And Diane, you and I talked about this, for artists who aren't in can apply to be juried in as well. So you could have quite a bunch of competition between the existing artist colony and outside artists who want to come here. Who's going to exactly make that decision? How are artists who are here now, or artists that want to be in the Torpedo Factory, how can they be sure that it's sort of a above board, transparent, and fair competition for this valuable space?
Sure, absolutely. So, we jury in lots of different artists for lots of different things. So we do it as part of our public art process. It's a very open and transparent process. We do it for the Target Gallery as well, which is the gallery inside the art center that we manage. And so what we do is we pull together a jury made up of arts professionals. Sometimes it's other artists, just different types of folks who are working in the field, curators. We're fortunate to be in the DC metro region, so finding those kinds of professionals, we've got an abundance to choose from. And then with that, you establish a really clear criteria, right? So what is it that we're looking for the artists? Of course, the great news is we all want the same thing. We all want the best artists in the building. And so when you start with the great art, it just kind of goes from there. We feel though that the art is really important and should start there, but we also feel that given the nature of the art center and the public facing work that the artists do, who the artist is also matters as well, and their ability to engage with the public and talk about their art is an important part of that. So, taking all of that into consideration is, how we'll be working to welcome new artists into the Art Center. So yeah, we'll see.
So Diane, let's just say you start this process of jurying current artists and aspiring artists who want to be here, and then you tell them in 2 years, well, guess what? You have to move out. We just juried you in, but now you've got to leave. You think it's going to dampen the interest in people who want to be here for the first time if they know they're going to be sort of moved away for a while?
I think folks are really going to want to be a part of something that has a vision for the future, that has a path forward. And I think for artists that are newly juried in, if we are fortunate enough to get to the point where we are going to do a full-on renovation of the Art Center at some point, I think there would be lots of time to plan for that. There would be lots of time to prep everybody for that. And when COVID started, we reached out to the folks at the Small Business Administration to help artists with the transition. So we've got an amazing amount of resources here in the city that we could work to connect the artists to. And I think, like I said, everybody would be given plenty of notice, plenty of support, to make that transition as smooth as possible. And like I said, hopefully they'll be excited for, what the new Art Center would be able to provide.
Say, Lisa, let me ask you this question about sort of one of the bullet points in Mayor Wilson's memo to council that he gave them the day they considered the meeting of the 14th. And it had to do with sort of questioning whether or not the cohort of artists that are here are representative enough in terms of diversity. And he didn't go into whether that was racial diversity or male, female, or age, but it seemed to have touched a nerve with some artists I know who are in the building now, as if diversity in and of itself makes someone a better artist. Or, I mean, how do you react to sort of that being a consideration now going forward? That might be part of a jury process, that you may be a great artist, Lisa, but you know what? You're a little too old to be here now because you had 16 years. I mean,
well, that's illegal.
Well, a lot of things are illegal, but it's a question if it's right. I mean, should that be something that's taken into account in terms of valuing someone's art?
No, not in terms of valuing their art, but yes, we all value diversity, and we strive to have the most diverse group of artists and the most diverse group of visitors. So I think that's something that we can all...
Describe what the demographics are like of people who work on these floors.
Who work on these floors? Well, I mean, they're overwhelmingly white. We would love for that to change, and I think that will change and can change if we make a concerted effort to reach out to different communities to jury in. I really feel like the city staff should be working with the TFAA because they've been jurying.
What's the TFAA?
Oh, the Torpedo Factory Artists Association. Okay. They've been jurying for a very long time, and I don't think it's true that we actually have a waiting list to get in. I think that we could use more artists in the building now. The jurying process right now, it's not.
Wait, Diane, is there a waiting list or not?
So we don't do a waiting list anymore. We usually do have more artists apply than we have space to provide for. Okay. So we do know, like you said, there's a number of artists, who welcome the opportunity. In the past, we really only juried artists in kind of when we had studios available and things like that. So this will be kind of something that, artists who are not currently in the Art Center can actually plan for and prep for, because it'll be an ongoing annual undertaking. So it'll make that, artists just won't have, artists won't have to kind of guess or ask or things like that. But we do have more applicants than we have space for.
Well, that's how the jury process would work. Like if you're jurying for a gallery show and you have, you have 600 people, like typically for the Art League, they have 600 people apply. They can only take 150 works. That's normal. So, I mean, that's not like, that isn't the same as a waiting list. I mean, I
think it just speaks to the level of popularity and folks.
How many people did you get for the last jury, Diane? Do you know? How many people?
What's that? I'm sorry, Lisa?
How many people applied to the last jury?
I don't have that number in front of me.
It was like 10 or something, right? I mean, we used to get, I think it was.
Yeah,
and we used to get at least 60 applying every year. I don't feel like what we're doing right now is it's just not transparent enough. Like,
Well, it's different than how the TFAA did it. So
well, I know, but I think
TFAA was
a
jurying
combined
for membership, and we're jurying for specific
took over
space.
the
So
jurying process for
the
the
numbers
Artists
are
Association.
gonna change with that.
So Marion, you were involved for a long time as a leader of the TFAA. So now the city's taken over the jurying process. What's your reaction to that?
Well, it actually worked very well before the city did that. We had a lot of interest. The Artists Association tried to reach out as far as it could, and then used gallery people from museums, art schools, etc., to be on the panels to do the choosing. And the Artists Association simply helped move the paintings around or bring them in, just to help facilitate the process. But the city decided basically that it was going to take over this process, and it did. And we now actually have some vacancies.
Well, I understand now there are 141 working artists according to the website, but I know just a few years ago, under the previous mayor, there were 180 artists that were here.
Yeah.
So there's been a loss of artists. Diane, can you explain what happened?
So, we've shared this before, artists leave because of attrition. We've got some artists who were out because of COVID.
All right.
We did have, approximately, I want to say it was about 50 artists who applied for the last round. But again, I stress that we're jurying in differently. So jurying for space versus jurying for membership into the organization is a big shift. And with that, it's going to look different, it's going to feel different, and the results are going to be different. But the good news is, like I said before, we all want the same thing. We want amazing artists in the art center.
can I speak?
Kind of looking at how we get there. This is a path that works with some of the other types of jurying that we do. We've had a lot of success. Right now, actually, all of our spaces are full. So I just, looking at the list, we don't have any vacancies right now. Again, we've got folks that are out due to COVID, but this has been a successful process so far. We've been jurying specifically for studio space since 2018. And I think to have 50 artists apply, in the midst of a pandemic for a public-facing studio space, I think is a testament to the popularity of the Art Center and how many artists want to be a part of it.
No, okay, good. I think Lisa wanted to sort of engage in a colloquy with you on this, I think.
Well, just a little, one of the things that happens in the Torpedo Factory every day, and we've always had about 10% turnover a year, so that we're getting a new group of artists all the time, and that's very important to us as well. We don't want people sitting here stagnating. We really want people that are in their studios, that are engaged with the arts community, that are applying to outside shows, that are volunteering within our community. We want that. So it's not like we're all just sitting in our spaces rocking back and forth, being sad. but when in previous years, we have had a call once a year. Everyone knows when it is, and they know how you can apply to be in the Torpedo Factory. And each artist is a little bit of an ambassador for that. And I am asked, not so much anymore, but I used to be asked many times a week, how can I be part of this? And I think it's partly because I don't know the answers anymore. Why don't I know the answers so that I can tell prospective applicants? And these people are younger, they're newer to the arts community, they're much more diverse than the artists that we have in here now, and I feel like it's a hindrance to our ongoing diversity to not be able to say to someone that walks in my studios and excited about this, that this is the way you apply, and this is when the next jurying is. And we would love for you to be a part of this experiment and this creativity. We want your input. We want you to be here. So I think that it would be very helpful if we could come up with a schedule with some answers that we can give to people, because we're the ones that are on the ground floor every day trying to recruit new and exciting people to come in here. It's not true at all that we don't want people to come in and make it more exciting and more vibrant. We want that, but we don't have the information to be able to do it right now. That's why I think that you need to partner with TFAA and maybe come up with a hybrid plan that does everything that the city wants to do in terms of jurying, but also gives artists that information so that they can be recruiting and reaching out to people, because otherwise we are stagnant.
So before I answer my next question from the audience, Diane, does that seem like a reasonable offer on Lisa's part to have maybe her and other people from TFA involved in this new jurying process? So there's a little bit of both an old and new hybrid version of jurying. I mean,
Yeah, we've met with TFAA, like I said before, we've been jurying for space since 2018. We've met with the TFAA before that. As I mentioned before, also that we are now going to have an annual process. So, with all of this going forward, now that we've got some direction from City Council and the directive to implement the action plan, we will now have an annual process. And Lisa will make sure that all of the artists have the information so that you can share it with your networks and with people that come into your spaces.
That would
Okay.
be fantastic.
So this question concerns part of the Torpedo Factory Art Center we haven't talked about before. Maybe not most Alexandrians know this, but housed within this building is the Alexandria Archaeology Department and the museum of the Alexandria Archaeology Department, which has all kinds of fantastic artifacts dating back to sort of early Native American settlers through the Revolutionary War and the Civil War. And it's a growing collection, of course, because the more we dig in the city, the more they find. So the questioner asks, what consideration has been given to the growth of the department, and will it be kept in the Torpedo Factory?
I mean, there's, in all of our plans, archaeology remains part of the Torpedo Factory. They're actually like an original tenant in the Art Center. I
Right.
think Marion might know better than I do, but I want to say that they've been there since the beginning. And, the history of the building is part of what we celebrate. And archaeology is a huge part of that. So right now, there's no plans for them to not be part of the Torpedo.
Okay. Stephanie, this one might be best.
Rod,
Go ahead.
Rod, I was just
Yeah.
going to add on that, though, showing my longevity here. The growth of the Archaeology Museum, though, has also been part of much larger discussions right through the waterfront plan, recognizing that we've uncovered these amazing boats and we're not going to be able to display them on the third floor of the Torpedo Factory. And so there are also other conversations going on about more space / different space in other parts of the waterfront for archaeology. So nothing, I think almost like everything in this whole conversation, the building itself is the limiter. If the building was not limited, we wouldn't be having any of these conversations, but it is limited in terms of how many people it can serve. And so I think we're trying to figure out how to renovate and pay for those renovations of this building, but also identify more opportunities for all of the people who are in this building and want to be part of it.
Okay. So this viewer asks, says on January 22nd, the City Council voted to approve designating 699 Prince Street as a tourism zone to financially support a luxury hotel. That was a controversial move on part of the City Council. It may still prove to be. But the question is it possible then for the city to designate the Torpedo Factory as a tourism zone for the city to financially support its maintenance costs? In other words, follow the same model. If you're going to support a private developer with a luxury hotel, why not support a similar scheme to help the Torpedo Factory get its maintenance done, essentially?
I know a lot about this, spent a lot of hours talking to council about this on Saturday. The concept behind the financing for 699 Prince Street Hotel is that the sales and tax revenue generated by the new project is going to pay off the loan that is facilitated through the TDFP. So we would need, in order to duplicate that, there would need to be a for-profit business or group of for-profit businesses generating a significant amount of sales tax to then float a loan. They themselves, the business, would have to go and get that loan. And so the problem with duplicating what we've done is that it was a private business. That's what made it possible. That's going to generate a lot of new tax revenue for the city. Again, getting back to kind of the crux of what our problem is, the city owns this. So There is no real estate tax, which is generally the big, contributor for projects. There's no real estate tax on this project because it's city-owned, right? As you were asking earlier, there's absolutely sales tax being generated out of this building. There are something like, 100 plus individual businesses, right? All the artists have business licenses. We've never, we can pull that sort of information with their permission, and we could try to tell a story about how much sales tax revenue is generated. But a lot of the studies, have basically found that there's not enough to pay for the sorts of improvements that we want.
Thank you. Diane, this one's up your alley, I think. It's a pretty simple question, maybe. How much does the city of Alexandria spend on the arts, including the Torpedo Factory Art Center, annually, and how will that number grow?
Don't know that, so it sounds like a bit, so how much does the city spend on the arts annually?
Yeah.
So the budget for the Office of the Arts, not including the Torpedo Factory, is just under $1 million. So that goes towards funding, some of the events that we do. It goes towards funding some of the grants and programming that we do. Public art gets about $250,000 per year to do all of the public art that we do. So, I don't see it growing. I mean, for those folks that have been watching the city budget, as Stephanie mentioned earlier, there's a lot competing for those city dollars, whether they're capital dollars or operating dollars. So, so I don't necessarily, see it going up.
Right. But I think in your answer you said that roughly $1 million does not include the Art Center.
Does not include the Art Center. So the Art Center, within the city budget, the Art Center operates what we refer to as a special revenue fund. So the money that it spends on the budget each year, so for things like salaries and all the programming and marketing and advertising and things like that, everything that the Art Center undertakes is paid for with the revenue that it generates. So the revenue from studio rentals, the revenue from private event rentals, which of course have been down during COVID. So the Art Center doesn't specifically operate off of, city taxpayer dollars. It's generating its own revenue and it's using that to run its day-to-day operations. Capital maintenance, on the other hand, capital maintenance is not being paid for by the revenue generated at the Art Center. So that has been coming out of the city's capital budget, which is the city taxpayer that's paying for that. So when we go back, to our conversation before about stakeholders and who's involved, that's a key reason why the community and other businesses are, part of those discussions, because that's where their tax dollars are being used.
Understood. Thank you very much. We're down to our last few minutes. Hours gone by very quickly. But I'd be remiss if I didn't sort of ask Marion, who is sort of the founder of the Feast here, the Feast being the Arts Center. I know you have some very definitive ideas about what should or should not happen, but are there things that you can see that need to be done to sort of bring the Torpedo Factory into its next 50 years?
Well, I think one of the things is getting the signs and the banners on the building again. Probably improvement of the restroom on the first floor, at least for the exterior. But there would be limited in really what kinds of changes can be made for the building. And I think we understand that. If you've got 30-foot ceilings, as we have on the third floor, for instance, you can't put another floor in there. And your heating and your air conditioning is up high. You're not going to get full effects of that. We understand that. We're not expecting the kind of heating and cooling systems that we would have in our homes or would be in an office building. So there are certain things that this building has that we can put up with as artists, but that other operations couldn't put up with. And it's, for instance, you couldn't have events for music, for instance, because the acoustics are terrible in the building.
So you're essentially saying, we don't mind living in sort of shabby chic artist space
Exactly.
to get our work done. Have you expressed that opinion directly to the mayor?
No, but you know, look at the ceiling here now, flaking. But it doesn't bother us that the ceiling is flaking. You know, it's just one of those things. So we're not trying to be prime office space. And we believe that we can put up with a good bit of the discomfort. The artists cleaned and painted this place to begin with. They still help repaint the hallways periodically and the columns in order to save money for the city. And we sort of like it as it is.
Okay, so you're really not open to all that much change. Lisa, I want to thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
As long as you're here and you're a 16-year veteran artist, just tell our audience briefly what studio you're in and what's your specialty.
I'm in Studio 16 and I do sculpture, paper mache,
So you're on the first floor.
clay, and a lot of found objects. Yeah, I'm the one that has the big dinosaur right outside of it. I do a lot of the art projects with kids in the building, and that's one of my
And the
focus.
Goodnight Moon Room.
And the Goodnight Moon Room, that's pretty
right, that's
exciting right now.
Well, I'll just say to our audiences watching, if you haven't been down here in a while or never been down here, you need to check it out. Even with wearing a mask during the COVID times, the studios are surprisingly high quality, in my view, and it may be one reason why there's been such longevity here. But I'd like to thank you all for watching on behalf of Agenda Alexandria. Thank you, Diane. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Lisa and Marion. In particular, thank you so much for coming out tonight.
Thank you.
So please join us next month for February, or I think we're going to have a really interesting program on race. We'll be announcing our panelists for that very soon. Thank you and good evening.
Thank you.